Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. I do have one quick favor before we get to the video that you came here for, and that is very simply this. You see that little red subscribe button below this video? Go ahead, smash that subscribe button. It really does help me. It really does help this channel grow and my audience grow. So go ahead and hit that red subscribe button. And now, here is the video that you came here for. That is the Louisville Cardinals. Because on Saturday, Louisville took one of the worst losses in recent memory. And in year 4, Chris Mack's program is going in the wrong direction really quick. There is obviously off-the-court drama based on what happened in the offseason with Dino Gaudio. And I'm starting to wonder, is the Chris Mack era about to come to a screeching halt? Does Chris Mack even want to coach at Louisville anymore? So let's talk about it. Let's discuss. Let's debate. And before we get into all of it, I do want to say one quick thing that I always have to say whenever I talk about Louisville. No, I don't hate Louisville. Every time I talk about Louisville fans, oh, you just hate us. You hate that. And for people who don't understand why, several years ago, I wrote a book about Kentucky basketball. And so ever since then, every time I talk about Louisville, oh, you just hate us. You don't know what you're talking about, Torres. Screw you. You hate the Cardinals, whatever. To be clear, I don't really hate the Cardinals. As a matter of fact, I'd take it a step further. In my limited interactions, and I don't claim to know the guy well, I don't know if he even knows if I was walking past him in the street, I don't think he'd know who I was. But in my limited interactions, I've actually really enjoyed being around Chris Mack. I obviously work for Fox. Fox has a relationship with the Big East. When he was at Xavier, we had a couple run-ins. Really nice guy. He came on this podcast after his first year at Louisville. Really nice guy. Took time out. Enjoyed the conversation with him. But at the same time, my job is to talk about the big topics that you guys care about. This is a huge topic, especially if the Louisville job opens later this year. And he's not doing a very good job right now. And so I'm not going to apologize. I'm not going to talk about it. But let's talk about what actually happened. And let's talk about why I'm talking about Louisville in the first place. And the reason why is pretty straightforward. On Saturday afternoon, Louisville went to play Pitt in a pretty nondescript ACC game. And Louisville lost that game 65-53 to the Pitt Panthers. Here's the problem. Pitt came into this game at 6-10 overall and 1-4 in the ACC, which sounds really bad, okay? And if you're Louisville, you can't lose to teams that are 6-10 and 1-4 in the ACC. But it wasn't just bad, it gets worse. First off, statistically, you can argue this is by far the worst loss of the Chris Mack era and one of the worst losses in recent Louisville history. That's not my opinion. Here's a fact. Jeff Greer, former Louisville beat writer, tweeted this out. And you guys know I don't love to use analytics and numbers and data to prove my point, but I think in this case it matters. Jeff Greer tweeted out, Pittsburgh ranked 177th in Ken Palm's efficiency rankings. Ken Palm is a famous college basketball database that ranks all sorts of things. Pittsburgh, ranked 177th in Ken Palm's efficiency rankings, is the second lowest rated team in 20 years of Ken Palm's existence to beat Louisville. East Carolina was ranked 183 when they beat the Cardinals on January 16th, 2002. And so Jeff Greer brings this up to say, this was, statistically, the worst loss for Louisville in 20 years. And here is where you're concerned if you're a Louisville fan. It continues a trend of pretty much stinking this year and pretty much stinking and pretty much the entire Chris Mack era going in the wrong direction. And so let's talk a little bit about that. Because in terms of this year, Louisville's terrible. And if you want to know why I'd ever talk about them, it's because they stink. With the loss on Saturday, they're now 10-7 overall. And look at some of these losses for Louisville. They lost to Furman early in the year, and Chris Mack was suspended for that game, so I don't know how much you could put on him. And Furman is really not a terrible program overall. Right now, Furman is struggling, but they've been a good program the last 2-3 years. Chris Mack wasn't at that game. Maybe it's not that bad. Just one problem. They get smoked by Michigan State in the Big Ten ACC Challenge. Okay, that one's not bad. Then they lose to DePaul. Well, maybe DePaul is better than we realized. No, they're not. Then what has happened the last few weeks? First of all, you take a loss at Western Kentucky. As a Louisville head coach, you can't lose to Western Kentucky. I know it's on the road. I know it's this. I know it's a weird time. There was obviously the tornado situation. I'm not making light of a very serious situation. But as the Louisville head coach, you can't lose to Western Kentucky. Then you lose to Florida State. Okay, Florida State, whatever. Then you lose to NC State, who right now is 9-9, and then you lose to Pitt. And so you're 10-7. But oh, by the way, as we record here, you've lost to Furman, Western Kentucky, a 9-9 NC State team, and a Pitt team, which statistically is the worst loss in 20 years. So clearly this thing is going in the wrong direction. That is why I would be concerned if I was Chris Mack about my future at Louisville. It reminds me a lot. Remember I just talked a minute ago about Dan Mullen, about how some of the media couldn't really understand why is Dan Mullen on the hot seat? It's because everything is going in the wrong direction right now, and there's nothing really to sell as a positive. As a matter of fact, if you look at the bigger picture of the Chris Mack era, this thing is torpedoing in the wrong direction, no doubt about it. Year one, Chris Mack takes over, has a bunch of Rick Pitino players, and I know there was a year with David Padgett in between, but Louisville goes 20-14, makes the NCAA tournament. Okay, year one, it's a rebuild, whatever, no big deal. You make the NCAA tournament, you lose in round one, ironically, to Richard Pitino at Minnesota, which probably wasn't very good. Then year two, you're actually really good. But again, it's mostly Rick Pitino's players, and that was the year the NCAA tournament was canceled, unfortunately. And you do feel bad for Chris Mack in that regard, because if he makes a Sweet 16, if he makes an Elite Eight, if he makes a Final Four, it gives him more runway this season. Unfortunately, the NCAA tournament is canceled. What happens last year? Louisville finishes 13-7. Louisville misses the NCAA tournament. And now you have a second year in a row where things are going in the wrong direction. You're now 10-7. You've lost to two of the worst teams in the ACC. That doesn't include you, because now you have to be considered one of the worst teams in the ACC. You've lost to two of the worst teams in the ACC, and there's no real reason to think it's going to get better, right? There's no great recruiting class coming. And beyond that, what I would also say is this. Chris Mack, unfortunately, is kind of out of excuses, right? Because this, again, and I use all these parallels from other coaching situations, but it's kind of like the Coach O thing. Chris Mack changed up his coaching staff in the offseason. Well, now you have all your own players. You have a second round of coaching hires, and it's still not working. And so if you're Chris Mack, I don't know what the solution to this situation is. You've already changed your coaching staff. You had off-the-court issues with Dino Gaudio, which embarrassed the university. And, oh, by the way, beyond that, what I would also say is this. There's no reason for optimism in recruiting. What is the quick fix in the offseason? You can't change the coaching staff. You just did it. Recruiting, there's no help on the way. Beyond that, the guys that you brought in that were supposed to help really haven't. Samuel Williamson, and I hate to criticize individual players, but was a McDonald's All-American. He hasn't really worked out. They had another high-profile player named Aiden Agahan who came in, now has transferred to Grand Canyon. So you brought in good players, and you either didn't develop them or you misevaluated or whatever. And again, I'm not criticizing individual players. You tried to hit the transfer portal last offseason. This is the result of it. You're 10-7. There's no real recruiting class coming in. You're losing to the best teams in the ACC, and so I don't know what the answer is. Now, look, obviously, over these next few weeks, could Chris Mack turn things around and all that? And all? Yeah, of course he could. But you are what your record says you are, and right now Chris Mack is 10-7. And beyond that, it's not like in the ACC there's a ton of big games that you can win to win over the fan base. Right now, the ACC is projecting like it might be a 2-3 bid league with Duke playing really well, Miami playing pretty well, North Carolina is kind of okay, but there's just not a lot of wins. And so if you're Chris Mack, I think, I just think this thing is trending in the wrong direction in a hurry. I know right now there's some weird administrative stuff at Louisville, but I would also have to ask, I don't even know if Chris Mack wants to stay at Louisville at this point after everything he's been through, the situation with Dino Gaudio, the struggles, the fan base, the this, the that. But this is a story worth monitoring. Because obviously if Louisville were to open, I think two things happen. One, it's probably the best job available if Louisville were to open. It still is a great job. For all of whatever criticism that I've given of Louisville through the years, it's probably one of the 7 or 8 best jobs in college basketball. You essentially play in an NBA arena. You're essentially in an NBA pro market. You are that market's professional team. And I do think it's a great job. I also think, by the way, and we could talk about candidates if it ever opens up, I do think, by the way, it also leads to an interesting trickle-down effect of does Chris Mack end up somewhere else, because I think he'd be a really good coach, but maybe this whole Louisville thing hasn't worked out. The bottom line is I could go on and on and on. At the end of the day, just something to monitor, because this Louisville thing is getting uglier and uglier and uglier by the day. Louisville is losing games that they should never lose to. You should never lose to DePaul if you're Louisville. You should never lose to Western Kentucky if you're Louisville. You should never lose to a 6-10 Pitt team if you're Louisville. It appears to be getting worse, and we're going to have to monitor this Chris Mack situation, because I think there's a good chance that job could be opening up this offseason. All right, a couple other results from college basketball, then we'll take a quick break, get to my boy Jim Mora. But a couple results. First of all, Shout out to them Hogs, the Arkansas Razorbacks. Eric Musselman, for people who did not see, he actually hurt his shoulder about a month ago in practice. I think he was taking a charge in practice and tore his labrum. Had to have surgery. Eric Musselman was not available for Arkansas's game. They go on the road and beat LSU. And what I would say from both teams' perspective, I'm not going to overreact to this. I'm not going to say that it's this incredible win. It's an incredible win for Arkansas, but I'm not saying that it changes their entire season. What I would also say is this is usually the time that an Eric Musselman team starts to gel. This was around the time that last year that this team kind of put it all together on their way to an Elite Eight. But it could have just been a game where they caught LSU at the right time. LSU was down several key players. Their starting point guard, Xavier Pinson's out a few games with a knee thing. They played really well at Florida on Wednesday night. This was maybe the bounce-back game where they kind of had the adrenaline of playing without him and were playing for Xavier and all that good stuff. Then, of course, you lose to Arkansas. So, interesting to watch Arkansas. They needed a signature win. They got their signature win, but we will see what happens with this program going forward. Actually, a pretty manageable schedule for Arkansas for most of January. Then February, it gets much, much, much tougher. But for Arkansas, their next two games are at home in SEC play. South Carolina on Tuesday night and Texas A&M over the weekend. The other result that kind of caught my eye, two results really. One, Kansas. Kansas destroyed West Virginia. Kansas is my preseason national championship pick. Caw-caw, caw-caw. Sorry, it's not as good as the dog bark, but my Georgia dog bark. How about my dogs? Okay. Let's get out of here. Kansas looked awesome against West Virginia. That is something worth keeping an eye on. Also, beyond that, I would say Sunday, Villanova absolutely destroyed Butler. Villanova's playing some really good basketball right now. They've beaten Xavier twice in the last probably about 3 weeks. I think Xavier's probably a legitimate top 20 team. They beat Butler on Sunday 82-42, so Villanova is